Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Dogcast. This week's guest, we've got a former coach of mine who gave him a debut and former grand final winning coach at Leeds Rhino. Really lucky to have him on. It's Tony Smith. How are we doing, pal?
I'm great. Thanks, Brad. Yeah, really good considering these challenging times.
That's what I'm going to come on to in a moment. But first of all, we would have thought that kid in the video room that used to ask for subtitles for would have had his own podcast and you would have been his guest there.
You have to ask these questions slowly for me to understand you, dog. You know that. So slow down. Slow down. I always used to have to get interpreters when you speak up in team meetings, but that was all part of the fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's it, mate. That's it. I was used to it after a certain amount of time. So let's crack on with it. Obviously, it's strange times at the moment. So, how's it changed your life, and what have you been up to deal with the isolation and lockdown? Yeah,
it's incredible, really. I just been thinking about it a whole lot. Like, even if we had notice on this, you know, how we would have planned for it, and it's really a difficult one. It's difficult to plan, and we've had to do it on the run, and the difficulty for all of us. You know, and I think this is not just rugby league, but society. There is the unknown, the uncertainty about our futures and about what's going on. And it's you know, for human beings, uncertainty is quite crippling. When you've got good news, it's always welcome. When you've got bad news, it's, you know, you can deal with it, you can get on with it, but it's uncertainty that cripples us. So, yeah, it's been tough, mate. In many respects, because trying to get players, you know, to understand that decisions can't be made at the moment, you know, and staff, and it's worrying times. But at the same time, you know, we've got to crack on and make the best of it and make the most of it. And for myself personally, I've not long moved over to Hull, and with my wife, I came over in November. She only came over in the end of January, and we're renting a house that's in great need of a lot of gardening and a lot of it's a very overgrown garden, so it's getting plenty of attention at the moment. But aside from that, a little bit of table tennis with the missus and a bit of darts. So
I love it. Speaking of things that need a bit of gardening, what's going on with the beard?
I'm going feral. It's just a feral look at the moment. Too lazy to get up and shave. Bit of extra warmth too, dog. So your hair seems to be getting a little thinner, actually.
Well, listen, I'm obviously, I can't say nothing. I've had a bit of a. I thought I was flying through lockdown, but when I look back, I've run about 100 miles. I've shaved my head, so I must be having a mini breakdown. But there's nothing wrong. I was worried. That was the reason why I didn't shave yet. At first was because I didn't think it'd grow back, but it's pretty thick now. I've got it down to the bone.
You do it all right.
Pretty pleased.
Geez, the birds are chirping over there in Wigan, mate.
Mate, listen, I've told you before, it's God country, mate.
They only come out.
What? Sorry.
They only come out twice a year, don't
they? No, mate. It's pretty good where I'm located at the back, mate. We can go for miles at the back. It's pretty open. Beautiful. It's an open cast. So there's plenty of wildlife, mate. It's not as bad as you think, this Wigan.
No, I'm sure.
But you mentioned then about from a player's point of view, and you mentioned then that it's the uncertainty, and that's the thing that I'm battling with now is they're trying to get my head around whether it's better for me to rest or whether it's, like I say, you don't know how long it's going to be, whether it's going to be a month, so whatever, whether it's going to be. I train the house down with the we've got a crowd in, and I don't want to go in undercooked and be in bad shape. So that's the most difficult thing, along with not binging. There's nothing else to do other than eat, but that's probably the difficulty as a player. That obviously take the wages. That's probably the difficulty that we've got, I think.
Yeah, it's keeping discipline, isn't it? As well as, you know, during these times, it's discipline of not eating too much and motivating yourself to go and train and do everything right when people aren't asking you to do it, you know, and we're not allowed to ask you to do it at the moment. I think we're all being put on furlough, and it's, we've got to keep any of our contact to a minimum, although, we're taking care of each other on WhatsApp groups and those sort of things. But, in terms of me being able to coach or giving instructions to what players do, we can't do that at the moment. We can give it a bit of advice on what should be good for people, but it's still their choice. But, when you've got that routine of coming into training with the lads and, you can crack the whip and say, hey, let's go a bit harder today, or, hey, you need to do a bit of extra work, or you need to get off the ice cream on the couch. We can keep eyes on body fats, and it helps you guys keep your discipline, doesn't it? And that helps. So it's a real test of character in many, many ways. Aside, and listen, we're only talking in terms of rugby league here, Dog, and, I don't want to take away the seriousness of how it's affecting so many other people in this society. So, it's a small price for us to have to pay, is, doing some routine stuff and missing out on some of our camaraderie. I know it's, and that's the big thing, I think, not turning up and seeing your mates and having banter and just getting that encouragement that you get from being around your peers. And I think, we're all pretty social people when it comes to rugby league, and we're missing out on some of that, mateship and that fun that we have, as well as that hard work and that feeling of going home at the end of the day where you've done a hard day's work, and you work hard and you feel good about yourself. And I think it's some of those sort of psychological things are the real difficulties that we're facing at the moment.
Yeah, that's I've spoken about that on previous ones with Jonesy, and that's the way I've been dealing with the lack of routine and the missing of games and stuff like that, is the fact, there's so many people in worse situations than us, and just being grateful that it's not the end of the world if we're going to have to go and train on our own for a couple of months and then hopefully get back healthy and back into the swing of things. Let's get into the coaching side of it now. Now, you used to say, your famous words, quote, "This isn't my words." I used to ask you how you did with your playing career, and you used to say, "Oh, I was rubbish, Dog. I was no good." But you've turned out to be quite the coach. So do you think that has anything to do with it, how good of a player or how well you went as a player to your coaching, or what's the difference?
I'm not sure. I wasn't, I was okay, but I spent half my time in reserve grade and half my time in first grade. I had to be at my best to be in the team. So I think what I worked out, Dog, if I could, when I was playing, if I could get the people around me to play well, that helped me retain my position, because if the team went well, I looked a bit better because I couldn't do a whole lot myself. So, I think I was actually coaching long before I retired, in some respects. But I don't know. It's also, I think it's a bit of our, behaviour in our family, the way I was raised. I've got an elder brother who, was a coach for many, many, many years and had a lot of success as a coach. And he was 13 years older than me. And so I got a pretty good insight behind the scenes as to what coaching was about. And I think, even when players get to the back end of their career and are considering coaching, I think it's a big learning curve for them. They don't understand how much goes into it. Whereas for me, I was able to see what went into coaching long before I retired. So I sort of got, I had a pretty good insight into what was to come. So I think I was nurtured a little bit to be that type of person that wants to help people get better. Also pretty realistic about my own ability in terms of playing wise. If I was a coach, I wouldn't pick me at all. But it helps me also relate to players who can't do some things. But it also helps me relate to players who can. And, I've had many players, and you've been around the place long enough and involved with me long enough. I had some players that could see stuff that I couldn't see even as a coach, and I encourage those people to help me be better and see more things. And you know, you played under Michael Monaghan, second fiddle to Michael Monaghan at one stage, and you know he could see a whole lot of things on the field that I could never have seen. So I would have been crazy not to tap into his abilities and his insight into rugby league. So, you know, coaching isn't just about what you know; it's about tapping into what people around you know and how they can help and share with one another. And generally speaking, I've managed to do that okay most of the time.
Yeah, when you speak about that just rings bells with me in the time at Warrington. When you say as a player, you got the players around you to play well, and that was your advice to most of us a lot of the times. But when I sit back now and I think about that environment that we had, and I took it for granted because that was the only environment I had at that time. I grew up in that environment. But now I look back and that's what it was. It was, you got it, so it just coached itself, really. It was just meetings that were led by us. And until you see other environments, you don't really see the difference. But now that's probably where that comes from. The player and you having to get players to buy in and do what you need them to do, rather than just go and do off and do their individual brilliance.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a big thing, big part of my coaching, and that you guys are doing it for each other, not for the coach, and that you coach one another, and I can encourage you, you know, and give you little tips here and there. But I think you're going to touch on some Leeds stuff shortly. You mentioned earlier, and I'll give you a couple of, you know, my points about the Leeds team at different stages. But you know, at different times at Warrington, we got pretty close to being, you know, you guys were self-sufficient in your coaching. I'd give a few tips in review here and there, and then you guys would go and fix things up. So, you know, but I'm very much, you know, the players on the field have got to make the decisions. They've got to handle situations. So I've got to help you do that through the week to get prepared.
Yeah. So moving on to the Leeds situation, and the best way, we had Chev on last week, and Chev spoke about his time in prison. I know you wasn't quite coach. You just got the job, I think, from Huddersfield. Do you want to give us your insight of what actually happened in your situation with Chev then? Because he went on to then speak about the year after when he won the grand final. He just ran into the corner and he grabbed all you and said, "How different is this compared to last season?" Them were his words last week in the last podcast.
Yeah, it was, you know, once again a really unique situation. I'd never come across a situation that, you know, I was going to take over a team and inherit a whole lot of new players, and I was, you know, studying videos on each one of the players to get to know them. But a couple of the boys, you know, being in Ryan Bailey and Chev Walker were both in prison at the time. So I managed to get a bit of footage on them, but I wanted to go and get to know them as people and you know, see where they were at mentally and see where they were, you know, how they wanted help really. And so I went and saw each of them. The chaplain took me to each one. You know, I can remember it vividly. And Ryan was in a pretty, you know, heavy duty sort of prison, and Chev was in a not so heavy duty sort of prison. And you know, each one of them suited their personalities, and you know, in terms of, you know, one had a shorter term than the other because of the severity of where he stayed, and he wanted to get it done. And Chev was using his time to better himself in a different way. You know, he wanted to, and I think, you know, I think he read a whole lot. He spoke to a whole lot of people, and yeah, there was a real connection there with both those boys at the time. You know, it was a unique situation for me, a unique situation to them. But, you know, Chev was just such a pleasure to coach, you know, throughout my time with him. And he savoured every moment that he got out of prison. He served his sentence for, you know, for what he did, and he made the most of it. And he's been doing that ever since, I think. I found him such a great person to deal with, a real good, lovely gentleman, and a pretty good rugby league player as well.
Yeah, and that's good. That'll be good to get on the back of his interview, because he speaks about that. He says that he just seen that time as, I need to better myself, do my maths, do certain things, and then he mentioned the Wigan game that they lost against. They lost against Wigan, and that was his moment where he started training. He said, "I'm never going to let them down again." But it's you saying that you went to visit him in prison, obviously as a coach wanting to get to know a player, it's interesting because I spoke to Chev and I thought when I looked at that situation, I thought it would have been just a young bloke making a mistake and having to learn from that lesson, but it wasn't. He was more or less just standing up for what he believed in morally, and it didn't really do too. Obviously, it was in the wrong in some points, but it was pretty morally right what he did, and he just copped what he did. So to then go and see him before you might have prejudged him of what he will like as a person, he's in prison, he's got this, but then to go and meet him will get a totally different version of what you'd think.
Absolutely, yeah. Listen, it's fine line stuff, some of this sort of stuff, and I'm not sure if you were part of it, but I remember taking a whole heap of young guys from Warrington to a prison in Wigan, actually, a juvenile prison. Were you part of that?
No, I wasn't, but I remember them sort of things going on.
Yeah, and it's fine line stuff sometimes about crossing the line and doing things that, morally you feel are right at the time, but in the eye of the law aren't right. And, there wouldn't be many of us out there in society that haven't crossed the line at some stage. Sometimes it's just some young people or some people get caught and some don't, or don't pay a big price for the mistakes they made. So, I think forgiveness is always a strong part of human society, and I think we need to have that. And, I went and chatted to each one of those young boys, and I didn't make too big a judgment about each one of them. I wanted to see what sort of human beings they were, and I had pleasure in dealing with both of them. I found them, really good. I know Ryan's had some challenges during his life and career as well, but I think Chev's been able to keep it all very steady and family orientated and rugby orientated, and I think that's real positive. And he's going to go on to be a terrific coach as well as a terrific human being.
Yep. So that we'll move on from that. And your time at Leeds was more or less the start of what they call the golden generation now. Would you say that you'd seen how good they could be, and would you have called that, or was it a shock to you when you look back on their careers and what they did as a group, or not?
I'm not shocked. It was. I think I got there at the right time. I think my coaching style suited Leeds, and I think they were ready for me. I was ready for them, in terms of coaching. And Leeds, you've been there a little while now. I think the fans and the supporters of Leeds Rhinos not demand, but like a certain style of rugby league and like a certain way of playing. And luckily my philosophy sort of fitted that mould. And so we're a good fit. But there's a whole lot of things that were right, and the timing was right about Leeds Rhinos and my time there. They had a really strong squad, a squad that had been in a lot of depth, but just lacking a little bit. And with my encouragement and a little bit of tweaking things here and there, but helping the culture, I think. They bought in really quickly. They needed to be a little bit stronger and a bit more disciplined in some areas, and I think I helped them focus on that. I'm also going to, in reflection, every team that I've coached that's been successful have had good leadership. Yeah. The thing that was a bit unique about Leeds is a lot of the best leaders were some of the younger guys. Yeah. Who are some of the ones who went on to be the backbone and the core of those golden years that you talk about, those successful years to come, such as Kevin and Rob and Danny and Chev, developed into some of that. And, we had an array of young people coming through, Jamie Jones Buchanan, and, they ended up being the backbone. Some of the leaders that we had there at the Rhinos at the start of it were very experienced players, but not always the best leaders. So it was a matter of, encouraging some of these young people to step up and to have more say and have more direction in the team. And I think they've been the real success of Rhinos. I'm not going to take away that there were some good leaders. Frenny Cummins, I tell some stories about Frenny Cummins. I always refer to him as one of the best.
Well, that's my next story, mate. That was my next story. That's the one that I remember. Is the one of we was involved in it in a lot of finals and getting into big games at the end of the year, and that I was a young lad coming through and a squad player really, and I remember it just heated up at that point of it, and a lot of the focus wasn't necessarily on the team. It was on the Reggies, as you called them, and it was all about you've got to get us ready. You're a part of this. And I remember referring to I'm better at Wigan than Wigan. I'd played Wigan that many times in training against you. But the story you told was the Franny Cummins story. Do you want to tell that?
Yeah. Well, I'll give a version of it. The best, the quickest one I can. But when I got to the club, Franny had been a former captain. He'd previously been captain, and Kevin had since taken over as captain. So I didn't put him through that. But up until I got there, I'm pretty sure of this, Franny Cummins had the most consecutive games for any player for Leeds in succession. So, he was part of the furniture and part of the, team makeup, and that all happened. And I got there and we had a few friendlies, and I ended up going with Marcus By and Calderwood. Mark Calderwood in the first game. And so my first official game taking over Leeds Rhinos, I broke the succession of Frenny Cummins as consecutive games. And as a former captain, and, you imagine the huge disappointment for him. And honestly, he accepted it so well, Brad. He was a real champion, and he just said to me, "Oh, don't worry, I'll work my way back in the team," and he did. He came back in the team at various stages throughout the year and played really well for us. But we get to the back end of the year and grand final time, and Frenny wasn't picked for that either. He wasn't selected for that, and he had a few injuries throughout the year. Real challenging year for him. But honestly, the thing that etched in my mind more than anything else at the end of that final whistle was Frenny Cummins was the first one running onto the field in his suit, bouncing in the air, fist pumping to congratulate his teammates. And that just epitomises what I think rugby league players should be like, and a team player should be like. He put his club and his team before his own personal gain, and that epitomises when you're playing in a solo sport, that's fine. But when you're playing in a team sport, it's difficult. And he really epitomises that for me. And I tell that story. Frenny's gone on to work for me a couple of times since then. I had him on the coaching staff, and he's somebody that I'll highly respect for the rest of my life. And so were the other players around him. There is a reverse story there, and I won't go into the details, but I've had a couple of players that deal with it personally really poorly, and they probably end up alienating themselves from team, and the friendships that spoil the friendships that they've had throughout their careers. But Frenny is right up there in terms of being the best team player I've come across.
Right, so obviously speaking about your success there in the grand final, I want to just move on to your time at Warrington. Obviously, really successful with the first Challenge Cup win. But I remember being a part of them squads. I think we lost against Wigan twice, and we lost against Leeds, I think it was. And I think most of the times we'd probably been the better team in the league all year. And we'd been in commanding positions at certain points in the grand final. So looking at the grand final win for Leeds and then the losses for Warrington, do you see, looking back now, is there any differences, or you think, that's why we didn't win it, or is it just basically that's just rugby league and that's the way it goes?
It's down to the day. It's down to the day, Dog. In my opinion, you've just got to be able to handle it on the day, and handle it on the occasion. There's things that can happen throughout games, and there was one final there against Wigan in particular, when I think Joel Monahan got injured and there was a huge stoppage in play, and the whole momentum of the match shifted. Well, that was just something that was going to happen, and you can't foresee that. We needed to be good enough to handle that, and on the night we weren't. But it's just down to each occasion. There's so many variables, and and players' mentalities, coaches' mentalities. There's referees' mentalities, the whole lot. It's there's so many variables there. It's down to on the day and whether you're good enough. And I've got a real thing about losing finals and winning finals, and I try to do both of them graciously. I encourage my players to do that too.
Yeah.
And I can remember I can remember winning a final against Kevin Sinfield in was a Challenge Cup, and Kevin was quite devastated, and and I had a lot of time and still do for Kevin Sinfield. So I went over to him and I just went, mate, don't beat yourself up too much about this. If you can't handle the losing of them, don't participate. You got to be able to handle the losing of them as well as winning of them. But he did that graciously as well. But I'm very much one of those people that take it in your stride when you happen to win, but learn from it when you lose, accept it, be gracious about it, and move on and be stronger from it. And that's what I try and encourage my players to do. Sometimes it's pretty devastating, because sometimes you think you're never going to get another one, and if you think you're never going to get another one, you're probably going to be right.
You mentioned the Challenge Cup finals. Then let's speak about the one that we was involved in, and the one against Hull was at 16, and the tackle 52 as it's labelled now. I didn't realise that was that big of a moment until we got off and we got interviewed about it, and we watched it back. You see the clips now of Ben's more or less over the line, and how the ball comes out, you'll never know. What was your opinion of it at the time? Obviously, you're in the heat of battle coaching us as well. Did you realise how big of a moment was? It's probably up there with one of the biggest moments in Challenge Cup, to be fair. I watched the programmes back, the top 5 Challenge Cup at the weekend, and it was on there then. Do you want to give us your opinion of it?
Oh, yeah. Hey, listen, it goes along with what I'm just saying. It's a game of inches sometimes, and it's a game of little incidents, but big incidents as well. Moments like that. Flip side of it is, Denny Houghton, wasn't it, that made the tackle?
Yeah.
What an incredible piece of play from that young man to, save the match, really, and be the match-winning, try saver. Just incredible, those moments. And, listen, you can go back through all that game and look at various things that may well have contributed to that outcome. But, we tend to pick on moments and say it was all down to that one. Had we have done a better job in other areas, Dog, it wouldn't have mattered what sort of tackle Denny come up with there. We would, So I try to put things in perspective like that. But at the time, was it a big moment? Absolutely. Was it, your heart go into your mouth? Absolutely. And did we think we got it there? Oh, I thought it was a try all day. But, when I looked at it closely, what a piece of play by Denny Houghton.
Yeah, especially the heat. I don't think people, I know I didn't understand or didn't realise how hot it could be in a game of rugby. I think that's the hottest I've ever been. It was ridiculous. I needed 80 minutes at 9. Obviously, I understand how difficult that is. And like I say, it was a big play. And it is good to flip it on its head, really, and look at it in a different way, and fair play to him. Let's talk about, I was on, Sean had me on Rugby AM a couple of weeks ago now, and he asked, we got talking about making your way in the game, and I spoke about how I thought I had it made. I came to Warrington playing really well in the reserves. I had Mickey and Mickey Monahan, both in the footies, getting on. Great players to learn from. I thought I've got a good couple of years here now. Learn off 2 of the best, and then they'll be more or less, when I'm ready, they'll be more or less done. Not realising that they were both Warriors and play through injuries every week, and very limited I think Mickey Iron played with 2 broken hands once. And Mona's would get knocked out every weekend, and at the time was a bit. He'd do 80 minutes and he'd be outstanding. I think he left me on the bench for 80 minutes at Wigan in my hometown club.
I think so.
I spoke about, and then the difference when we brought Darryl in, and Daz had probably played 100 games more than me, or an X amount of games, and I just spoke about looking back on my development. I thought I had the perfect route through, but now I look, and it was probably difficult being at a club like Warrington where you've got the option to go and get whoever you need. But it wasn't just that; it was my personality. And when you put me out on a field to play my position, you have to be composed at certain times, and I think I lacked that. But I never was able to develop that because I never knew when I was going to be back on the field. If you understand what I'm saying, and this isn't me pointing things at anyone else. It's how you handle that situation that you put yourself in. But my question to you would have been, if I try and put it on the other foot and say to you as a coach, how difficult or what were the challenges of being a coach at a club like Warrington, where you can go out and get whatever, well, not whatever, but you're pretty fortunate to go and get someone if you need someone. How difficult was it then to blood some youngsters through? Whereas you look at, like to Casper, that's the example, a bit of talent, they go, right, this might be a bank, this might be a gold mine for us, let's give this a go.
Yeah. Different places have different setups and different strengths. You're right there, Brad. The resources are probably a little bit more available at Warrington at the top end than most clubs or many clubs. But also the junior setup probably isn't as strong as some other clubs. So it's almost a little bit of a necessity to go and get some players from elsewhere. Or, I know they're trying to change that and been trying to change that even during my time there. But it's a tough mix. It's a tough one, and it's a tough one for a young guy. I think for you, and I'm going to talk a little bit about you as well. You're right. I can understand that not developing composure, because when you did get your chance, you had to make the most of it, and you had to try and stand out at the time. That's also a good thing in some respects. I'll also go back to some of your development even before you got to first grade, and I remember speaking to one of your coaches at one stage who wanted you to be a whole lot more steady as a player, and I had to say to him, hey, don't rein him in too much, because part of the reason why he's good is because he backs himself and he goes for it, and so it's getting the right mix of it, Brad.
Balance it.
To try and develop people into having composure at the right time, trying to educate them when to back yourself and when not to, or when it's too big a risk, and how to. So for a young guy, sometimes if you're not in the team, you've got to do that through video, through sitting down and doing one-on-ones and hoping that message gets through. But there's no greater practice than being in the team and practicing what you preach and what the coaches are preaching week in, week out. So until you got a run in first team or playing rugby league regularly, it's really hard for you to develop composure, so, but at the same time, to get to play in a strong club and not struggle every week and not get battered around every week. I was at the other end of the spectrum there. I was playing for poor teams throughout my career and getting battered every week. I learned about composure very quickly because there wasn't much else. So whichever way you come through, you can look at it and say, oh, I wish I had have had a bit more of this, or I wish I had have had a bit more of that. But it's making the most of what position you're in, and which club you're at. But I don't disagree with you that sometimes you get to a stage where if you're playing second fiddle or third fiddle, it's time to move on and make a name for yourself.
Yep, 100%. And we'll speak about that. I wanted to just speak about that squad, and another challenge that I found is you're coming into a team where you want to make a name for yourself, but then on one side of the road you've got Brett Hodgson calling football, And then on the other side of the road, you've got Lee Breers calling football, and that was a challenge. The squad that we had, like Moz, Carvel, Hodgson, it was, and you don't realise how lucky I was until you look back at some of the names in that squad were unreal, and that was a challenge coming through, especially a hooker when you've got to pick where you pass it ball, and you've got Breezy and Hodgson calling football. It's difficult, but the lessons that you've got to learn. Absolutely.
And sometimes you would have picked those right and you would have got a pat on the back for it, and sometimes you would have, passed it the wrong way and Breezy would have chewed your ears off.
That was the big one when I kept running.
But, it's learning at the time and later on, and that's why reviewing your performance is so important, so as to learn from it. What I would always encourage is for you and anybody else playing that, pass it to the side that it was supposed to go to, and the only way you can do that is by looking and using vision and developing that, rather than going, he's a bigger name than him. It's knowing which thing to do because of the situation that's in front of you. But difficult for a young guy to do that, 100%. But your default was pick it up and go, and that worked for you pretty well for most of the time.
Yeah, that's what it is. Too much sometimes. Do you remember the Tenerife story? Let's talk about when I was waiting for the flight, when I was more or less booking another plane to the training camp in Tenerife. Do you remember that?
No, tell me, remind me. I'm old now.
We went to Tenerife quite. I think we went 4 or 5 times. Well, 4 times I think we went. Training camp between a week and 10 days normally, sometimes 2 weeks at the max. And I remember I must have only been about 20, and we were supposed to be going. I was living with my dad at the time. My dad had gone away on holiday, so I was on my own. And we got an early morning flight from Manchester, and I just get a phone call from Fitzer saying, "Where are you? Where are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm in bed. Why?" And he went, "We're in the airport waiting for you." Because obviously, meet at Warrington, I'll meet at the airport. So they thought I'd meet at Warrington. Once I wasn't there, they thought, "Oh, just meet us at the airport." By the time they got there, I was still asleep in bed. So anyway, we're more or less. I'm on the phone to Fitzer, trying to make this flight, and it wasn't looking like I was going to make it. Rush hour traffic in the morning, and so Fitzy said, "Right, you'll have to book yourself a flight." Obviously, Club had paid for everything, but he said, "You'll have to pay for this flight." And I was like, "All right, no worries." I sets off in my car, and I realised, what am I going to do with my car? I can't park it, just rock up at the airport and park it. And I was lucky enough, my uncle was driving past me the other way on his way to work. I flagged him down, dropped my car off, and he took me on his way to work. He took me to Manchester. And at this point, we was looking at flights to book. And it was literally like EasyJet, the programme that you used to see on TV where they're late for the flights and they rush them through. And I got to the gate, and you was the last person getting on the plane. So you was the last person, and I just made it. And he went, "I just hope you know how lucky you are." And I think I had to do the piss spots all week. That was it. So I was getting everyone's piss and measuring how hydrated they was. But yeah, it was a lesson I had to learn. And
absolutely, mate. Hey, most of us have, and like I said before, most of us make mistakes in various ways. I think you learnt your lesson. I didn't have to say too much to you, because I think when most of us as human beings realise, as long as we realise that we've stuffed up, that's the lesson in itself. I can't remember another time have you ever been late.
Not on a big occasion like that, anyway.
Well,
not for a big flight.
Had you have been late in the second time, it would have been the last with me.
Yeah, and that was it. It was an anxious couple of hours trying to get that flight from the motorway and stuff. So that was enough punishment for me, and the dealing with everyone's piss all week. Burning my hand, Tenerife, it's boiling, and I've got everyone's pee all over my hands. Stunk. The other topic I wanted to speak about was you. Mm-hmm. You might not know much of this, but you brought Fats to Warrington. And that was the first. If I remember you saying, everyone looked at you as if you were square at one point, saying you're bringing a proper counsellor, because the player welfare manager at that time was just a past player who'd get you deals at Nando's or get you free stuff. It wasn't really to the extent that it is now. Whereas Fats was actually a counsellor, and he'd have a background in rugby league. But you brought Fats to Warrington, and at the time. it didn't mean that much to me. It was one of them meetings that you just sit through. It's just this quote you've seen at training, said hello to. And then when you left and I left, he came to Leeds, and I went through a difficult time. And I reached out to Fats because we had a great environment at Leeds. It was a bit different to Warrington. Warrington was ruthless, and it was literally you had your back up all the time, and it was. But Leeds was a bit more open, and I was changing as a person anyway. But I reached out to Fats as I was struggling, and he's probably, I would say this, he's the most influential person in my career and my life, tenfold, because they go together, like you'll know. I just wanted you to speak about it was you who brought Fats in, and obviously when you went away from rugby, you went into player welfare and stuff like that, and you've always been massive on it. So why is it so big for you to bring someone like Fats in?
Oh, well, the impact that they can have on all of us, is enormous. I'll give you a bit of background, Dog. My last coaching job in Australia was assistant coach at Parramatta Eels, and that was 1999 and 2000. And the end of 2000, I took over Huddersfield Giants. But before I left Parramatta had a full-time welfare manager for the first team and a full-time welfare manager for the academy setup. Yep. That was over 20 years ago, about 20 years ago.
Yep.
And it was twofold. One, it was about welfare and young men and taking them out of school and taking them out of different careers. They're going to have some difficulties, both in terms of social difficulties, mental difficulties. They're also going to have to reintegrate back into regular society when they finish their careers, because careers are so short, and some of these guys won't last more than a year, and some, the lucky ones have a 10-year or a 15-year career, but they've still got to integrate back into society, and that transition is difficult for so many. So the club, Parramatta, saw the need in both ethically in terms of what to do, that we needed to take care of our players in order for them to perform well. And that's the other part of it. If that's taken care of, if mentally they're helped and well balanced and they're developing themselves well, their performance will actually be better. So it's a performance-based thing too.
Yeah.
So it's twofold. So, I've been banging on about player welfare and taking care of not only their welfare and mental well-being at the time, but also preparing them for when they finish their careers. There's not been a better welfare manager in the game in this country than Fats, no doubt. Yeah. He's probably the most qualified, and that's part of our issue. We all have welfare managers, but you're right. They're usually people within the club that were already going to be within the club, rather than specialised and actually, qualified to actually deal with some of the issues that they're dealing with. Yeah. Incredible amounts of work that he does. I'm glad you're speaking up about how he's helped you personally and the impact, but mate, there's so many others that he's helped along the way. He's certainly helped me and supported me and still does in many ways. And hopefully I do a bit of that for him as well, because he hasn't had the easiest of times in his life as well. We all need to take care of each other, and that's the point of it. And I think some of those things are underrated and undervalued and misunderstood as well. I read some comments recently about, we need to not worry about player welfare and all that. Bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers. We need to take care of our players. We can still play numbers of games throughout the week, and, I've managed to get rugby league up and running again. But we've got to take care of our people. There's nothing more important than the people of any business and any society. So, that's enough from me on that.
Yeah, and that's it's pretty similar in the way you spoke about. how you wanted your environment. It's pretty amazing to see, and I don't think anyone would have expected it at Leeds. Now, what we've got is we have got a bunch of blokes that are caring for each other, and Fats is, along with some of the stuff that coaching staff and the people have put in place and environments they've created for us. But Fats has been really big for that. Everyone, it's not hid that you go and see him. Fats, everyone will know. It can be hid if you want to, but everyone knows that people go and see him and they open up to him. And what he's also done with people like me, I know Dickie Marler's one as well, and Dom, who's been through so much stuff. But what they're starting to do now is try and give back, not in a way where you say, "Oh, I want to give back because I've been through this," but just creating that environment now where people are actually caring for each other, which is all Fats is doing, really. Well, all he's doing, and in some ways, it's taking a lot of work off him because we're all doing it for him. But he's created it's a special place to be at the minute. Once you look back and you look back in, it's great.
When you've been supported, in, you understand and you start to, it educates you on how to support others, doesn't it? And I know you've done a whole lot for a whole lot of other people since you got some help about and support from Fats. How many people have you gone on to help? And it snowballs when it happens if it's done right and it's done well. And I think that's a great analogy that you're coming up with Dom and Richard as well. That once you understand, you start to want to create that, and it becomes very, very powerful.
You start seeing it in people. You start seeing people that need that bit.
Absolutely.
Just the last story and the last question, and then we'll wrap up. It's been interesting to do these podcasts, and obviously you create relationships with people. Now I've got relationships with Jamie Jones Buchanan, Chev Walker, all these people. Now, I never knew them, didn't have a clue who they was, but then I had a relationship with you before, but now I know them, and so we all speak now, and this podcast has created an environment where I speak about certain things, and it start realising we all did the similar things. So one thing that's got mentioned is the eye contact, and it came out in Chev Walker. Chev Walker spoke about how every morning he came around, shook everyone's hand, and Jonesy mentioned about the eye contact. Every morning when you came around and you shoot my hand, after a while he said, "You never look at me in the eye," and it became a thing between us, didn't it? Where we stare at each other in the morning, and I'd start picking you up about the eye contact. But Jones' story was pretty good because he says that you pulled him up. He was training on the old Abbey Fields, I think it was, and you was delivering a session, and Jones is counting the trucks on the train going past, and he said, "If you want to play for this team, you've got to start listening to me and learn." And he spoke about that in his podcast. What is the reason that you do want that eye contact and you go around purpose every morning? You do go around and shake everyone's hand.
I don't necessarily shake hands. I will with those who want the handshake, but I do say hello and greet people every morning. I think it's the least I should do as a manager or a leader of people. It goes back into different parts of my career when I worked in other industries. I worked for a bank, and some bank managers would never speak to me until lunchtime, and that sort of stuff. And I just thought it was not a nice way to treat the people that you work with. So my bit is decency to start with. If I'm going to get the most out of each of my players, they need to be greeted each morning in order for them to understand that they're important enough in my life to come and say hello to, and hopefully vice versa. And my other part about it is just by saying hello and how you're doing, you can tell a whole lot about how somebody is, whether they're okay or whether they're not, just by the manner in which they respond. If you do it every day, you start to see patterns and you start to see who isn't right, and you might come back and spend a bit more time with that person. The other part about it, and the eye contact part of it is, and you and I sat down, and you weren't strong on eye contact, and you'd actually told me that you'd had that said to you in other aspects of your life as well, your relationship even. And it's true. When somebody's speaking, if you're not looking at them, it's almost a signal of, I'm not that interested, even though you may be listening.
Yeah.
But you could not be listening as well. You could be counting trucks like Jonesy was. When you're actually looking into somebody's eyes when they speak, it lets them know that, hey, I'm at least giving you the time of day to listen to what you're saying. And it doesn't mean you have to drill holes in them, but laser beam through their eyes. But I think it's one of the traits of human behaviour. If you don't look at somebody when they speak, it's almost at times can be dismissive.
Yeah.
I try to give all my players respect when they speak, and I think I explained this to you at the time. So whenever you spoke to me, hey, I'm going to look at you and take on board what you're saying, I just ask for the same. And I think it's a way of creating a mutual respect for one another. At various places I've worked, and still do sometimes, I can walk in and say good morning and somebody doesn't lift their head and they just say good morning while they're still looking at their computer. And it's almost like, am I actually in the room here?
Yeah.
So there's subtle things, but I just think they're acts of decency, really, and it's about treating each other decently and having respect for one another, enough to say good morning and look each other in the eye when you do it.
Yeah. Right, the last question, I don't know if I'll get an answer for this or not. Obviously, you're getting on now. You've been coaching for a while. Have you got a best coaching moment or not? What would you say it would be?
The story I always tell, and I mean this 100% sincerely, there's a young man that it was during my time at Leeds Rhinos. This sums up what I'm more about. It's not there isn't a rugby league moment, Dog. There was a young man who came to work one day a week at Leeds Rhinos. He'd helped the janitor, John, God bless his soul, passed away, John Arms. And
is this the bloke that you brought to Warrington that time?
Yeah, young Richard.
Was it him that visited?
Yeah, young Richard actually come and presented me. Fats brought him across to present me with my 400th game or something like that. We'd hit some landmark in terms of Super League games. And, it was Richard. I don't know. I can't remember Richard's last name, but Richard started coming in to help the janitor one day a week. He's special needs. He's a Down syndrome young man. And when he first started coming into the club, he was that shy. He'd stand behind and he'd hide from you. He'd give you no eye contact, like we're just talking about. He wasn't able to, really have a conversation with you. He didn't want to. He was too shy. He was never, just couldn't come out of his shell. And this went on for weeks and weeks and months. And each day that he'd come in, I'd make a big fuss over him. And I'd get my staff to as well. Hey, Rich, how you going, mate? And just chipping away. I kept chipping away. That young man developed into, something so much different. He'd come into my office and he'd sit down, and sometimes he'd give me a yellow card and send me out of my room and sit in my chair. And, we were able to bring him out of his shell to the point where he was confident enough to do some things in society that he would never have thought he was going to do. He ended up playing. He plays Yes, he plays that regularly, but he also plays darts once a week. He used to catch a cab to work. He ended up catching buses and, integrating into society. And, I'm not taking credit for it, but I think the staff and the people at Leeds Rhinos contributed to that young man having a whole lot different quality of life. And I think they're the moments, and I'm just going to round this off because the last game that I coached for the Leeds Rhinos was 2007 grand final, and I was leaving and we happened to win it, and what a fairy tale finish for me at my time at Leeds. But the amazing thing for me, Dog, was, and this is why it's the moment, I suppose.
Yeah.
Out of 80,000 people, I didn't know where he was, but on the far side of the ground, I saw him. I saw him out of 80,000 people, and it just made me cry. For him to be there, and my journey with him in some respects was finishing, but for him to be at the grand final, me to be finishing it was a very, very special one. More than winning the grand final, it was the fact that Richard was there, and I was able to lock eyes with him and go over and give him a hug. You know, so it's those sort of things that leave the biggest impressions.
Yeah, 100%. And on that note, it's a great story. I didn't know that story, so I'm glad I asked the question. I didn't think I was going to get an answer as good as that. But yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. And obviously, really appreciate you coming on and speaking about the stuff that we spoke about. And everyone at home, stay safe and stay home. And
Absolutely.
Cheers, pal.